Look, I think there certainly is concern because obviously what we're seeing is the Liberation Party, the ANC, losing ground substantially. It seems quite normal around the world, obviously after 30 years, but of course, the economy performing poorly. And as we know, when economies perform poorly, we tend to see a negative effect on the government. And of course, for the ANC, both the 2010s decade and of course this decade as well has seen economic growth struggle and in the main fail to absorb all the job seekers who are looking for work.
Yeah, very difficult one because, your currency strategists then, Annabel, have also been working very hard. They make note of 15 Rand to the US dollar coming up in a few years. That's a big appreciation from the current 18 that we're seeing. How does the Rand get there, especially with a possible coalition in sight then after these elections?
Well, we have purchasing power parity, as you correctly said, at 15 Rand to the US dollar. And of course, what typically happens is that when you go into a global interest rate cutting cycle for the United States economy, then obviously you do tend to see emerging market currencies benefit around the world. And the Rand is both an emerging market and a commodities currency. So consequently, it does tend to have a significant, strong strengthening effect on the Rand when the United States cuts its interest rates sustainably. And of course, that is what is expected to happen over 2025 and 2026, which of course will lead the Rand towards the 17 to the US dollar mark, if not towards the 16 to the US dollar mark. Already we've seen the Rand strengthen from above 19 in April to close to 18 Rand to the US dollar in May. And of course, that is part of that strengthening in anticipation of US interest rate cuts, but also, of course, as well, because financial markets are factoring out concerns they had that the South African government might go into coalition with the extreme left-wing political party and, of course, see a shift in its policies towards the extreme left. That is no longer expected now as a central case, and, of course, that risk premium has come out of the market significantly.
Annabel, there seem to be so many negatives about the South African economy. Some of this was expressed actually recently through the BHP advances on Anglo-American and just not wanting the South African assets in the portfolio. If we look at the inequality that exists, the unemployment rates, the basic services that are basically failing, what sort of radical reset is now required to try and steer the economy forward?
So I think, you're quite correct in mentioning that the ANC has really presided over a decline in economic fortunes in South Africa, both in the last decade and this decade, after the very positive decade of the 2000s when we saw economic growth lift towards the 6% mark and then exceed it, and unemployment drop from 30% down to 21%. Of course, what's happened subsequently is that there has been a big deterioration in the electricity and, of course, in freight in South Africa, and that has hamstrung the export industry. So both inability to get bulk commodities easily through the ports and through the rails, and, of course, as well, insufficient electricity in order to create the manufacture and production that is needed. So what we have seen in the past couple of years is some turnaround, and of course that's due to the business-government collaboration. We've actually seen load shedding reduce significantly compared to a year ago, and then actually become completely eroded in the last couple of months, and that's due to a very strong improvement in the functioning of electricity power stations in South Africa, significantly less in terms of unplanned outages. Of course, there is still some congestion at the ports, but the expectation is that the ANC will see at least around 45 to 40% in the elections, which will allow it to go into coalition instead with some centrist political parties, which then should result in these reforms continuing, both with the help of the private sector in terms of fixing the electricity and the freight areas, as well as reducing crime and corruption and getting off the grey list, but also, of course, as well, extending into stronger economic growth and better employment. So that certainly are some of the significant reform policies that the ANC is looking at and wishes to continue, and therefore will be quite careful in terms of who it goes into coalition with to allow these reforms to persist.